Let's now meet our guest, Augustin Tamba, the mayor of Yaoundé 7 and the president of the Cameroon Association of United Towns and Municipalities, who is at the heart of issues related to sustainable housing. Faced with the combined challenges of climate change and funding, what will the African cities of tomorrow look like? He spoke to Abubakar Munchili in Yaoundé. Hello, Augustin Tamba. Thank you for joining us on Initiative Africa. You recently took part in the International Conference on Climate Change and Sustainable Housing in Yaoundé. What were at stake?
There are a lot of problems. We need to talk about resilient housing and even resilient cities. But the problem is posed differently. I would like to say that today, we need to think differently about the notion of the city. Perhaps we need to think about promoting intermediate towns and territories, rural communes, if you like. Why should we do this? Because in Africa, there is enormous potential for developing agriculture in all its conceptual cross-cutting aspects. That is livestock farming, fish farming, modern agriculture, etc. Because this is a source of added value. We are therefore thinking of a policy of economic co-production, a policy of economic co-production concentrated in the territories with the economic potential, because there is significant potential in our territories. There's the land, which is good for everything, agriculture, farming, etc. There's the wood, there's the soil, there's the environment for tourism, development. And so we want to professionalize all that, and to do that, we have to look for people. We need to find professionals elsewhere. We need to find funding. That's why I'm talking about economic co-production, but based on regional development.
At this conference, there was a lot of talk about funding to meet the challenges of building safe and sustainable cities. Do you think that the co-production funding model is best suited to these issues?
Everything we are going to build is based on the ability to act financially. And I don't believe in global philanthropy. I believe in a global contribution to the fight against climate change, even though commitments are not being met. Out of 100 billion released internationally at the conference in Copenhagen, I think it was only 2 billion that went to Africa. I think that's a drop in the ocean of needs. So there needs to be a little international justice. We've talked about a number of things. A local tax that will go into the fund set up by the states, which would be financed by companies involved in oil extraction, mineral extraction, timber extraction, food processing, breweries, brewing industries in general, etc., and which are also polluting in the process. The funds raised would allow local authorities to build decent housing and to talk about resilient cities. You know, initially housing is not social. The cost of housing is not social. There is a cost to building housing. But it's a political decision to say that this housing will be social. So part of the funding has to go somewhere. Hence, this engineering, which can only be based on the co-production that I mentioned at the outset. In other words, these multi-actors which enable the state, development partners, and local authorities to work together to improve and build decent housing.
What is the practical reality on the ground of the state's support for the communes and United Towns of Cameroon?
In our vision of CUV, United Towns and Cities of Cameroon, we are committed to regional diplomacy, which means that following a marketing program that aims to turn towns into levers for growth and development hubs, we can produce there, and this will also create jobs in urban areas. Young people would leave the cities to find these centers of interest and added value at local level. This would also enable us to structure these intermediate towns and rural towns in a way that reflects what we are developing for the future. In urban areas, the dismantling of deprived areas also poses a cost concern, which we see in the first field of intervention. There is a concept that has been developed internationally, namely the participation of indigenous populations in the release of land, concerted development that consists of ensuring that rural landowners can give up plots of land in exchange for development of infrastructure, energy, and water. And in terms of development, these are concerted developments. In other words, they give up part of the land and retain ownership of the other part. But this land is gaining in value, so it can also be used for projects we are dreaming of today. And we also need to say that we need inclusion policies, local materials in rural housing, so that we don't fall into the trap we are seeing today. And even in the city, we need to explore ways of making housing cheaper, but with due regard for the environment and promotion of local materials.
The anarchic occupation of spaces with substandard buildings leads to disasters, as we saw recently in Yaoundé. What's happening? What is the problem?
But the problem is people's standard of living. It's an economic problem. If you don't have money, you can't invest. And for our economies to be able to develop, there are things to be done. And that's why we called earlier at the conference. We called for more, for climate justice, so that what is released at global level to promote and combat climate change in our cities, a large part of it is allocated to Africa, which is the world's second largest source of oxygen. There are also government policies and private policies which respond to a much more specific type of engineering, because there's a risk of coefficient. Private banks are in the business of making profits, so there's no single typology that can be put in place. There's no global solution. There are a variety of problems that arise, and we believe that in Africa, it is a problem of economic development that is at the root. Governments have a lot of will. A lot is being done in Cameroon today. We are part of the strategic thinking that wants our cities to be great places to live.
Let's talk about the National Association of United Towns and Municipalities of Cameroon, of which you are the president. What is its role and contribution to building Cameroon?
It is an association. It's our umbrella body that lobbies financial institutions, all institutions, development partners, and above all, the government. The government that implements state policies. So we provide this interface so that we can help the government to better address the problems facing the population, which are opposed to the cities and which can help to improve the living conditions of Cameroonians. And I believe that this advocacy is permanent. It is adjustable. We are not a union to fight the government. We are here to work alongside the government, but to pose the problems without complacency so that the right solutions can be found, because we are in action every day. And I can tell you that it's not easy being a mayor.
You are the mayor of one of the largest municipalities in Cameroon's capital. What are the challenges facing municipalities like yours today?
The biggest challenge is to improve people's living conditions, but this is a very broad view. There's infrastructure, there's water, there's energy, there's survival, health, education. So it's multidisciplinary. So I wouldn't wish you to be mayor, especially without the means.
And if that's the case, how are the country's mayors and local authorities meeting their commitments and tackling these challenges?
But the local authorities have the limited resources that have been put in place, and we are working hard to increase these resources and our capacity to intervene.
You are also a businessman and head of several firms specializing in coaching and investment promotion. How do you manage to reconcile this with your duties as an elected member, mayor, and chairman of the National Association of Communes and United Towns of Cameroon?
Well, I like to say that it's an advantage to be a company director because the private sector calls for a lot more thought, and this ability to think, to structure, and to organize has enabled me to better manage my commune and the organization of the umbrella organizations of communes in Cameroon, which I was elected because it must be said that my team and myself were brought here by an election. So it enables us to have the tools that we bring from the private sector to the public sector. But this is not a unique case in Cameroon. When you go to the west of Cameroon, I think 70 to 80% of mayors are company directors, and I think it's even lucky sometimes to have wealthy mayors or mayors who have other capacities for action and intervention who even support local development.
What are you doing to attract investment on the African continent and more specifically in Cameroon?
We have a very pronounced territorial marketing approach. We organize the GECOM, the concept of GECOM being the International Economic Days of Communes in Cameroon, and we are now at the second edition. Support agreements were signed for agricultural projects and local authorities. That's what we think. We think that there is an economic co-production that is geared towards the search for professionalism by seeking out foreign partners. That's why this platform, the International Economic Days for Local Authorities, is being used to put financiers, investors, local authorities, economic projects, and private sector projects led by local authorities on the same stage, in order to nurture the hope that changes in our country will take place.